The marble steps of the Capitol gleamed under the morning sun as the world watched. Flags from nearly every nation flapped rhythmically in the light breeze, and armored convoys lined the avenue, their silent presence a reminder of the tensions this ceremony aimed to dissolve. The Global Peace Ceremony, a historic gathering of political and spiritual leaders, was unfolding with grandeur and precision in Washington, D.C. But what was meant to be a harmonious display of unity would soon fracture into a moment of silent but thunderous discord. For weeks, anticipation had built across the globe. Rumors of behind-the-scenes negotiations, strained alliances, and ideological clashes whispered through diplomatic circles. Yet, none of that could prepare the world for what was about to happen. Pope Leo XIV, the enigmatic spiritual leader from Rome, stepped onto the crimson carpet with a quiet authority. Known for his progressive yet unyielding beliefs, he had spent the past decade redefining the Vatican's role on the world stage. With silver robes and unblinking eyes, he was revered not just as a religious figure, but as a moral compass for many. Not far behind, Vice President Kamala Harris arrived with practiced confidence. The click of her heels, the crispness of her tailored suit, the measured wave to onlookers. She was composed, sharp, and fully aware of the cameras documenting her every move. For her, this ceremony was not just symbolic, it was a moment to reaffirm America's leadership in the global moral dialogue. Before we continue with this critical moment in history, don't forget to subscribe for more in-depth political storytelling and analysis that reveals what really happens behind closed doors. As the two figures approached the ceremonial stage, the energy shifted. Diplomats and dignitaries rose in anticipation, cameras from every angle honed in, lenses tightening their gaze. Kamala smiled, poised and ready as she stepped toward the Pope with her hand extended, a gesture as much of protocol as of goodwill. But something went wrong. Pope Leo paused, his eyes flicked toward her hand, then upward to meet her gaze. In a moment so brief it nearly escaped comprehension, he turned his face slightly away, his own hands clasped before him. He did not reach out. He did not shake her hand. The air thickened. Kamala's smile faltered, only slightly but enough to be noticed. Her hand remained suspended for a second too long before she withdrew it with subtle grace. Her expression recalibrated into one of dignified restraint, but the moment had already escaped containment. Every journalist in the crowd sensed it instantly. The crowd, dignified and composed until now, became a sea of hushed whispers and incredulous glances. Was it a mistake, a misunderstanding, or something far more deliberate? Kamala turned to take her position on the stage, her back straight, her chin lifted. But the tension hung over her like a shroud. Pope Leo moved to his designated spot, offering only a mild nod of acknowledgement to those nearest him. This was not how it was supposed to go. Backstage aides exchanged frantic glances. Phones buzzed in pockets. Camera feeds were dissected in real time by international networks. The handshake that didn't happen was already a headline. In that one moment, something deeper than decorum had broken. The question wasn't simply why Pope Leo had refused the handshake, but what message he intended to send by doing so. And as the ceremony continued, every gesture, every glance, every line in every speech would now be interpreted through the prism of that singular, silent refusal. The silence that followed the handshake refusal was not just awkward, it was seismic. Within seconds, the mood at the Global Peace Ceremony had shifted from celebratory to brittle. The audience, filled with world leaders, diplomats, and spiritual icons, became a sea of restrained reactions. Gasps were muffled behind hands, eyebrows arched, eyes darted from Kamala to the Pope and back again. The handshake that never happened had shattered the script. Kamala Harris stood motionless for a breath longer than usual, the trained composure of a seasoned politician wrapping around her like armor. But even she couldn't mask the slight twitch of her cheek or the momentary tightness around her eyes. The cameras caught it all, the stutter in her smile, the hesitation in her movement, the silent retreat of her extended hand. It was subtle. But in the high-stakes theater of diplomacy, subtlety speaks volumes. In the control rooms of every major news network, Producers shouted over each other, switching feeds, zooming in, analyzing frame by frame. Commentators began to whisper the same question. Was that a deliberate snub? Behind her poised expression, Kamala's mind raced. Was this a message? An insult? A misstep? No briefing, no memo. No advisor had hinted at this possibility. She had walked toward Pope Leo XV with the intent to project unity, respect, and mutual leadership. Instead, she had been left hanging in full view of the world. She replayed it in her mind, trying to find something she missed, some signal, some warning. Pope Leo, meanwhile, stood unmoved. His face remained neutral, unreadable. But there was something in his eyes, an absence of apology, a presence of intent, as if he had weighed this moment in advance and chosen to make a statement without uttering a word. Whispers surged among the Vatican delegation. Aides-de-camp leaned toward each other, some with confusion, others with knowing glances. Inside the press tent, the temperature had metaphorically spiked. Reporters tripped over cables and one another, rushing to file the first impressions. At the edge of the crowd, whispers began to morph into murmurs of confirmation. Some attendees had overheard quiet tensions earlier that week, discreet Vatican criticisms of recent US diplomatic maneuvers, questions about moral leadership, and even speculations about Harris's role in key international negotiations that clashed with church doctrine. White House officials watching from backstage clenched their jaws. One advisor was seen speaking rapidly into a secure phone. Another stepped away entirely, hands on her head. At the same time, Vatican spokespeople were caught off guard. None offered an immediate explanation. When asked, one assistant simply replied, "No comment," his face a mixture of discomfort and resolve. Another off-record suggested that the Holy Father's actions spoke for themselves. That phrase, "spoke for themselves," began trending globally within an hour. As the ceremony resumed, the air remained tense. Speeches were delivered, awards presented, but none of it held the audience's attention. All eyes were on Kamala and the Pope, waiting for another signal, an exchange, a glance, anything that could clarify the gesture's meaning. But nothing came. What had begun as a moment of awkwardness was rapidly transforming into a diplomatic incident. Allies called for calm, critics seized the opportunity, and in the minds of millions watching live or on replay, a new narrative was forming, one in which the silence between two hands became louder than any speech. One gesture, no contact, endless implications. By midday, the moment had already eclipsed the ceremony it disrupted. On every news channel, website, and social feed, the video clip replayed relentlessly. Kamala Harris extending her hand with dignified certainty, and Pope Leo XIV turning away in silent denial. Within hours, it had become the most shared political moment of the year. Anchors dissected it, analysts argued over it, memes exploded across platforms. In one, the Pope was photoshopped into classic rejection scenes. In another, Kamala's frozen hand was surrounded by a spotlight, her expression turned into 1,000 interpretations. But the consequences went far beyond digital virality. Political analysts called it a diplomatic earthquake. Former ambassadors debated protocol and tradition. Vatican scholars were pulled onto television panels to speculate. Some insisted it was a breach of etiquette. Others claimed it was a form of theological protest. And yet, no official clarification emerged from either side. Within the White House, tension thickened. Aides scrambled to prepare damage control strategies. Briefings were updated hourly. Kamala's office worked overtime, consulting public relations experts, diplomats, and religious liaisons. The vice president, though outwardly composed, was furious. She had faced challenges before, but never a public rejection from one of the most revered figures on earth. The silence from the Vatican only made matters worse. When reporters questioned the Holy See, the response was deliberate. The Holy Father acknowledges the complexity of global morality. That cryptic sentence sparked even more speculation. Was it about American policies, a critique of domestic issues, a response to a classified briefing? The nation quickly divided. Supporters of Harris decried the Pope's action as disrespectful, even misogynistic. Others praised it as an act of courage, an unspoken rebuke of modern politics. Protesters appeared within hours. Outside the Vatican embassy in D.C., banners waved with slogans ranging from "Dignity for All" to "Truth over Politics." Across the street, counter-protesters held signs reading "Thank you, Your Holiness." Tensions spilled over in debates, on college campuses, even in churches. Meanwhile, Kamala prepared her first public response. Standing before a sea of reporters, she delivered her words carefully, her tone measured. She thanked the organizers of the ceremony and acknowledged the complexity of international relationships. She never mentioned the handshake, never accused, never clarified, but her eyes, firm and unwavering, spoke of quiet resolve. "In times like these," she said, "grace and clarity must lead us forward." Her statement was praised for its restraint, but many still hungered for answers. At the same time, whispers from inside the Vatican grew louder. An anonymous source claimed the Pope had reviewed a recent U.S. intelligence directive just days before the event, one that allegedly contradicted a key Vatican stance on an unfolding international crisis. Whether true or not, the rumor lit up international media. Back channels between Washington and Rome buzzed with encrypted exchanges. Intelligence officers and religious liaisons engaged in tense conversations. Every word, every omission was parsed for hidden meanings. Then, without warning, the Vatican issued a brief statement. The Pope would address the global community within 48 hours from the Vatican embassy. No details, no agenda, just the announcement. As for Kamala, she was confirmed as the keynote speaker at the upcoming United Nations Human Rights Summit, scheduled the day after the Pope's message. The timing wasn't lost on anyone. Now all eyes were locked on what would come next. What had begun as a handshake refusal had become a geopolitical storm. And the world, captivated and polarized, waited for clarity in the form of words long overdue. The world watched in silence as Pope Leo XIV approached the podium inside the Vatican embassy in Washington. Dressed in austere white and flanked by two cardinals, his presence alone demanded attention. The room was quiet, no applause, no introductions. The Pope adjusted the microphone, cleared his throat and began. His voice was calm, deliberate. He spoke not of politics or personalities, but of moral clarity, of the weight leaders carry when their decisions ripple through the lives of millions. "Peace," he said, "is not merely the absence of war, but the presence of truth. And truth, even when uncomfortable, must be spoken." He never named names. He never referred directly to the incident, yet every word resonated with meaning. He spoke of the failure of modern diplomacy to uphold human dignity, of alliances forged in convenience rather than conscience. He questioned the integrity of those who speak of unity while tolerating injustice. And still no direct accusation, just a resounding moral challenge. The address sent tremors through the global stage. Analysts scrambled to interpret the references. Commentators debated the implications. Was it about a war zone the US had remained silent on? A domestic policy that clashed with Catholic teachings? Or a deeper spiritual dissonance between power and principle? As the echoes of his speech reverberated, Kamala Harris prepared for her own address, this time at the United Nations. Her team had debated every word, every gesture, and as she stood before the assembly, there was no avoidance, no ambiguity. "The world changes when silence is broken," she began, "and though silence may sometimes be mistaken for grace, today I choose clarity." The room was still. Kamala spoke of progress, not the kind defined by power, but by inclusion, equity, and collective courage. She called for global cooperation rooted not in tradition but in compassion. And without once mentioning the Pope, she said, "When the old guardians of morality seek to shame, we must respond not with anger, but with purpose." The applause that followed was respectful, yet cautious. Allies cheered the assertiveness, critics saw defiance. Meanwhile, in private corners of the diplomatic world, a different storm was brewing. A former Vatican aide, speaking under strict anonymity, leaked a sensitive internal document to a major news outlet. The contents were stunning. It detailed classified communications from the US State Department regarding a recent covert operation overseas, one that, according to the document, the Pope had vehemently opposed due to human rights concerns. The document didn't accuse Harris directly, but it revealed a pattern of decisions taken without ethical consultation, ones that conflicted with core Catholic doctrine. The leak deepened the divide. Supporters of the Pope declared vindication. Defenders of Harris decried the use of leaked documents as moral manipulation. Religious leaders issued statements both supporting and condemning the Vatican's position. For both Kamala and the Pope, the personal toll was mounting. In Rome, Leo spent hours in prayer, reportedly refusing meetings with top cardinals. One close advisor said he seemed wounded, not by politics, but by the world's moral fatigue. Kamala, meanwhile, found herself increasingly isolated within certain circles of influence. Allies privately expressed concern. She met with faith leaders behind closed doors, seeking to build bridges. Some accepted, others quietly declined. But through it all, neither side showed signs of retreat. Both had spoken, both had stood their ground, and now rumors swirled of a final meeting, scheduled perhaps for Geneva, where an upcoming summit would bring both figures together once again. The world wasn't ready to move on. It wanted closure, or at least a reckoning. Weeks passed, but the world had not moved on. The image of Pope Leo XIV turning away from Kamala Harris still lingered in the public psyche. Universities held debates. Op-eds flooded every major publication. Documentaries were already in production. But underneath the noise, a more profound question had begun to surface. Not about the handshake, but about what it revealed. Across media outlets, philosophers, theologians, and political analysts all wrestled with the meaning of that moment. Some framed it as a mirror, a reflection of the fractures between faith and governance. Others called it a test of leadership, resilience, and moral clarity. And a few dared to suggest it was something rarer still, a confrontation between two visions of truth. In a quiet moment away from the cameras, Kamala met with her senior advisor, Maya Thornton. They sat alone in a secured office, shielded from the chaos of press inquiries. Kamala's voice was softer than usual, but steady. "You know what he said to me?" she asked, eyes fixed on the distant skyline. Just before he turned, Maya leaned in. Kamala repeated the words, quiet as breath. "Power without conscience is not peace." She let the silence settle. Maya didn't reply. There was nothing to say. The Pope hadn't just refused the handshake. He had spoken, if only to her. That sentence haunted Kamala more than the gesture itself, not because she didn't understand it, but because she did. Then, without warning, an envelope arrived at the US Embassy. No stamps, no courier, just an embossed seal of the Vatican and a handwritten note inside. The letter was from Pope Leo. He thanked her for her words at the UN, acknowledging their eloquence and strength. He wrote of disagreement, not with her position, but with the moral silence that often surrounds decisions of immense consequence. "We do not need to agree," he wrote, "but we must not pretend that silence equals peace." It was both a challenge and a gesture of respect. Kamala's reply was equally thoughtful. She wrote of burden, the burden of decisions no one wants to make, of lives weighed in meetings few will ever know happened. She thanked him for the courage of discomfort. "Perhaps peace," she wrote, "begins not in agreement but in honesty." The letters were never officially released, but their contents leaked, not through scandal, but through intention. Both sides allowed it, carefully, quietly. The world reacted with unexpected grace. Protesters faded, commentators softened, the frenzy cooled, replaced by reflection. The moment had not just sparked outrage, it had started a conversation. For the first time in weeks, the storm subsided. And yet, the memory of that stage, of the refused handshake, still lingered, not as shame, but as symbol. A moment when two of the world's most visible figures stood not just for nations or beliefs, but for principles. In the end, the message was clear. It wasn't about offense. It wasn't about pride. It was about conscience and the courage to hold it in full view of the world. One gesture, no contact, endless interpretations, but in the silence between them, truth had spoken louder than any applause. If this story moved you, challenged you, or made you think differently about the fragile bond between faith and power, don't forget to subscribe. And click the next video on your screen to continue the journey into the stories that shape our world.